If we're talking about a philosophical phenomenology, journalism doesn't quite get there because it doesn't do the eidetic reduction part. It's not looking for essential structures in the same way a phenomenologist does. It's looking for, it's staying with, it generally stays within everyday understanding, the level of where maybe he might begin to question some of the constructions and try another construction, but it doesn't go down to the ontological level in the way Heidegger does.
How do you know that? So that was my question for you last time we had this discussion, which is, so if you go do a phenomenological study, how do you know that what you're doing is somehow getting at that better than when somebody else just has a discussion with a friend?
Well, I think it's what is it in the service of? What's the purpose of it? For Whittaker, he ultimately wants to illuminate something about what's happening in the world of mental health, and make people aware of it, maybe motivate them to make changes in it. But he's not doing it, he's not attempting to reveal something about, ultimately reveal something about what it means to be. He's not doing an ontological project.
Is there a single thing about what it means to be that trumps all others? That is, different people are going to have very different ideas about what it means to be. And so I never understand that. So a phenomenological researcher is doing a phenomenological study.
Well, let's switch tactics for a minute and go to phenomenological psychology, right? So let's switch levels, because I think that's maybe going to help you answer the question I think you're getting at. Because what I think we were originally interested in was what about phenomenological psychologists who used methods like Amadeo Giorgi's empirical phenomenological method, right? And there's other approaches, heuristic phenomenology or hermeneutic approaches to phenomenology. But let's stick with Giorgi's approach just to keep it simple. You can see that he's adopting the same Husserlian structure, right? He's starting with a phenomenological reduction where you attempt to bracket your presuppositions, but but he's looking at a specific phenomena, right? Instead of getting at the question of being, he's saying what's the meaning, the psychological meaning of a phenomenon. You see the difference? He's not asking an ontological question. Right. He's asking a psychological question.
Is there a singular meaning? That is, so from sort of my perspective, that there isn't, that different people may draw different meanings from the same thing. And we'd be hard-pressed to sort of say that one meaning trumps the others, because there you're not even really talking about, you can't even really get sucked into the idea of what's the external kind of reality, if you want to sort of have that kind of conversation. Right. Instead it becomes, if you and I watch the same movie, and you say the true meaning of the movie is one thing, and I say the true meaning of the movie is something else, and then we get into fistfights about it. Now people in the arts seem to realize that they're just doing different interpretations of the same thing, and they might disagree, but neither one's going to likely say, maybe they will, I don't know, but neither one's likely to say, well, I've scientifically shown that my interpretation of this movie is getting at, what really is, the Bad News Bears is the best movie ever because...
Well, I think interpreting movies isn't psychological research necessarily.
No, but the meaning in the movie.
The meaning in the movie. We'll come back to that. Let me come back to that. But I think, but let me stick with the movie example without saying that it's psychological. We watched the same movie, I don't know what's a good movie you seen lately? You ever see Mulholland Drive by David Lynch?
I don't know if I saw that one.
Okay. Have you seen what did we talk about earlier? We talked about what's your favorite movie?
God, Citizen Kane. There.
Citizen Kane. Okay. So we both watched Citizen Kane, and there's the famous last scene where the rosebud scene.
You've just ruined it for everybody watching.
Oh, sorry. But no, I didn't, because you still don't know what rosebud is.
Yeah, that's true.
So this famous ending with rosebud scene. I mean, I might interpret what that means in a very different way than you interpret what that means. But there's still some constraints, right? There's still some constraints in the structure of the film that restricts those meanings, restricts us to a certain range of meanings, right? That just any interpretation isn't necessarily a valid interpretation. If I say, oh, what it means in the end when he says rosebud is, he has some bad gas pains, and that's why he said rosebud. would be a really ignorant and silly thing to say.
Well,
it
might be,
missing the
it
point.
does sound silly. Although somebody might be able to harness an argument that convinces somebody somewhere about
Maybe,
that.
but I don't, you know, I'm thinking it absurd, somewhat
Right.
absurd, but not so absurd that maybe somebody possibly
But you know, it
could
wouldn't be just the
say it.
movie that constrains. I mean, by that logic, it wouldn't just be the movie that constrains the meanings.
Mhm.
That is the structure and who you are that you bring to the movie. Your sort of psychological structure, who you are, your experiences, your past, how you perceive things, whether you're colorblind, you know, all
Right.
kinds of. I guess
Which
it's
is
a black
why,
and white movie, but
which is why in the phenomenological, when we talk about phenomenology, we don't think about the person. We don't start with the assumption that the person is like an atom and that there's this interior and an exterior, right? So we think of Dasein, or whatever you want to call it, human being, or the experience, as something that can't be thought without a person and world coexisting together. People and worlds always go together. I mean, you know, so it's impossible, even in the abstract, to even begin to imagine what it would be like to have one without the other, because we don't know what it's like to not exist without a world, and we don't know what the world would appear like without our.
But if that's true, then
experience.
Each individual's sort of essential truths that they sort of settle on, even if they're doing phenomenological method, are going to be idiosyncratic, because it's always an interaction between them as a unique being and the world.
It would not completely idiosyncratic, right? Because there's still, even though no human being ever exists separate from a world. It's not just any world. Like right now, we share a common space, right? I can even have a sense of what it might be like to sit in your chair and to feel it the way you do, even though we have different bodies, and you know, our bodies are structured different ways, and we're having a slightly different posture. I think I have a sense that, you know, when we look over there at the camera, hi camera, that we have that we're converging. There's a fusion of horizons, right? Where you might be focusing on a different significance of that camera. You might have different goals or values or interests about that camera. But when our gaze both locks on that camera, I have a sense that there's a convergence of those horizons. There's something about that camera that transcends our idiosyncratic interpretations of it, and that allows us to have some ability to comprehend one another. You know, so a common world is the basis for intelligibility that can be signified in gesture, like I can point, or in word and language, where we can begin to name things. So Merleau-Ponty uses this term, the signifying intention, that's there originally in gesture and then becomes a formula, bubbles up into language and symbolic speech. And then once we enter into symbolic language, then we can think in more abstract ways.
So it's very different from, for example, a radical constructivist point of view.